Good evening. For our last discussion post, I decided I was going to make a video. So I'm just going to jump right on in. Our first question was about what are the major goals of authentic and alternative assessment. So if I'm thinking just what is the major goal of assessment is of authentic assessment is to better assess our students. And from what I gather from the reading, there's a lot of different ways that you could go about assessing ELs in a more authentic way than just relying on standardized testing. So one of the things that was mentioned in the last video was the need for us to use progress monitoring as a tool to better assess students. So not waiting to the end of a unit, but continually assessing, formatively and summatively assessing students throughout a unit. Another tool that was mentioned was portfolios. So I really liked how the article discussed the use of portfolios as a way to help learners. I like to use portfolios in my classroom. I find them very useful. A lot of the things that were mentioned in the article were things that I find useful about it. It helps me manage student work, so I know exactly where their work can be found. It helps me track their growth within class, but it also helps my students track their own growth. So there's some autonomy in that that I find very helpful as a teacher. And then I like that when you keep a portfolio, if you have a parent-teacher conference, you can always use that as a resource to show parents where their child is at in their learning. One of the other things that was mentioned, I believe it was in the first video, was how important it is for us to assess students' native language knowledge, and then use that knowledge that they already have or that literacy they have in their native language, use that to help them acquire the English language. But I think the biggest thing was that we can't just rely on standardized testing and how detrimental standardized testing is for ELs because it doesn't actually show all they are capable of. Okay, the second question was, how does authentic assessment bring value to teaching and learning for ELs? So that's kind of like what I was leading into. But before I get into how it helps ELs, I wanted to talk a little bit about how it helps teachers. So authentic assessment brings value to teachers because it helps teachers build a better understanding of their students. As I mentioned before, in the high stakes assessment and ELs article, it said this: for many decades, a deficit model has resonated in the literature, suggesting the cause of low achievement for Hispanic and other minority students is the students themselves. And that is the problem with standardized testing, is it makes it seem as if there's a problem with the student, and it doesn't actually show what a child is capable of. So I think that with authentic assessment and keeping portfolios and progress monitoring, teachers will have a better idea of where their ELs actually are as far as learner groups. And you can see the baby steps that they make instead of just seeing one huge chunk at the end of this semester or the end of the year, and you're just using that in regards to their growth. Another thing that I found really interesting was the 3 main challenges that Dr. Pierce brings up in the last video. She says the 3 big areas that make ELs challenging to teach are language, culture and previous education experience. So as educators, I think we can use authentic assessments to empower children. But in order to empower them, to make them feel that they are making those baby steps, we must first understand their comprehension of literacy in their native tongue, and then use that information to help them learn English or acquire English, or to advance their progress in learning English. So that's kind of what I gathered from the readings. A lot of these readings are, I think there was one in particular, the high stakes assessments and ELs article, reminded me of the video that we watched earlier in the semester about the little boy who was trying to prepare for a test, and his parents were telling him how important it was, and he knew that it was important. He was trying to express how important it was for him to do well to the teacher, and the teacher was frustrated. And I think that it just reminded me of that video, because it's just another example of how standardized testing is detrimental to ELs. So that's kind of what I gathered, and I hope that everyone has a lovely week ahead.